is nutrient density? The term nutrient density refers to the concentration of nutrients per calorie in a food. High nutrient density foods supply a high amount of essential nutrients relative to the energy they contain. But with only a small number of nutrients required to be on a nutrition facts label, and a wealth of highly mixed opinions on which foods are good for us, how do we actually know if a food is nutrient dense? The Nutrivore score. The Nutrivore score is a way to quantify the nutrient density of a food and make the nutritional evaluation of foods objective. But the good news for you is that you don't need to do any math. I've done that for you. And in fact, right now, you can look up almost 8,000 foods in the Nutrivore score database. Wait, before you go rushing off to look up how nutrient dense your favorite food is, let's dive into the science and history of nutrient profiling to understand how the Nutrivore score works. But more importantly, how you can use the Nutrivore score to inform your day-to-day choices and up the nutrient density of your preferred diet or anti-diet. The concept of a nutrient-dense food was first defined in the 1970s, originally as any food that provided significant amounts of essential nutrients per serving. Around the same time, a good source was defined as delivering 10% of the daily value of a nutrient or more, and an excellent source was defined as delivering 20% of the daily value of a nutrient or more per serving. Because of a lack of formal criteria for determining whether or not a food is nutrient dense, inconsistent and subjective standards were applied, largely built around food groups and sugar and fat as being problematic, rather than vitamins and minerals and other important nutrients as being beneficial. As a result, some really awesome foods were labeled as unhealthy based on their fat content, like nuts, olives, and avocados, which we now know are some of the most heart-healthy foods we can choose. And some nutritionally underwhelming foods were labeled as healthy based on being a good source of a single nutrient. For example, a sugary fruit punch can be labeled a good source of vitamin C if it contains 10% of the daily value of vitamin C or more per glass. In the early 2000s, the definition of nutrient density was updated. Instead of referring to nutrients per serving, nutrient density would now measure nutrients per calorie. This switch came from acknowledging that most people's diets were falling short in terms of essential nutrients like vitamins and minerals, while consuming abundant and often overabundant calories. We needed a way to help people consume more nutrients for each calorie rather than more servings of food. But how do we identify nutrient-dense foods? The answer is nutrient profiling, the science of categorizing foods according to their nutritional composition. In fact, in 2006, the European Commission proposed that nutrient profiles should be used in order to make nutrition and health claims. And what followed was the development of a confusing array of similar methods to quantify the nutrient density of foods, including nutrients for calorie, calorie for nutrients, nutritious food index, naturally nutrient-rich score, nutrient-rich foods index, nutrient adequacy score, and nutrient density score. These scores differ from each other in small but meaningful ways. How many and which nutrients go into the calculation is different for different scores, ranging from 6 to 23 nutrients. Some of these scores place a cap on how much one nutrient can contribute to the score of 100% daily value, while others recognize that because we don't always eat exactly one serving of a food, that a food having more than 100% DV per serving makes it a particularly valuable source of that nutrient. So the nutrient density score should reflect that. Some of them are normalized, and some of them are normalized separately in different food groups, and some of them are penalized for total calories, saturated fat, added sugars or total sugars, sodium, or cholesterol. As an aside, it doesn't make sense to me to penalize a food for containing sodium or sugar or saturated fat, because it doesn't matter how much is in an individual food. What matters is how much is in our whole diet. Plus, the presence of something like saturated fat or sodium doesn't take away from all of the valuable vitamins and minerals that food contains. We just want to understand how much of those foods to eat to balance our overall nutrient intake. And when you look at how various foods stack up using these nutrient density scores, the results don't quite add up. When the quality of people's diets were evaluated using the Nutrient-Rich Foods Index compared to the Healthy Eating Index, which is a measurement of how well someone's diets align with USDA dietary guidelines, The nutrient-rich foods index only accounted for 44.5% of the variance in the healthy eating index, meaning they didn't align particularly well. And when the naturally nutrient-rich score of 120 different foods was compared to the average healthiness rating from over 700 nutrition professionals, like registered dietitians, nutritionists, and other health professionals, there was only 62% agreement, meaning that for 38% of foods, the naturally nutrient-rich score showed that it was way better than the average healthiness ratings from the nutrition professionals, or the other way around, that it was much lower. Certainly, some of these differences can be explained by the unearned reputations of some foods as being unhealthy that would have swayed the scores being given by the nutrition professionals. But the bigger issue is that the NNR only uses 14 nutrients in its calculation. The most complex algorithmically of the nutrient profiling systems is the food compass, which incorporates 54 food attributes into its calculation, including assessing things like additives and processing. However, the food compass has been heavily criticized for the way that it weighs certain attributes more than others, because it's skewing the results towards plant foods in a way that doesn't reflect the current scientific literature. For example, Lucky Charms cereal scores twice as high under the food compass system as ground beef or cheddar cheese. And a boiled egg scores about the same as pineapple canned in heavy syrup. So despite 2 decades of work, none of these nutrient density scores have been adopted by any agency or institution. Why? Well, as we've just seen, they're not ready for prime time. So with a complete lack of consensus in the scientific community on how to quantify nutrient density, I developed my own nutrient profiling method, the Nutrivore score. The Nutrivore score is built on the scientific foundation already laid by studies in the field of nutrient profiling. Algorithmically similar to the nutrient-rich food index, but using way more nutrients in the calculation, and not penalizing for added sugars or sodium or saturated fats. And most importantly, the Nutrivore score was developed with no prejudgment of which foods should score higher or lower, and no feeling of necessity that the Nutrivore score had to align with any specific diet. The Nutrivore score is a measurement of total nutrients per calorie of a food. The Nutrivore score is calculated as the sum of 33 nutrients relative to their daily values and divided by the energy density of the food. By dividing the amount of each nutrient by its daily value, we're putting the amount of that nutrient into the context of how much our bodies need. And by dividing by the energy density, the calories per gram, we are converting a sum of daily values into a measurement of total nutrients per calorie. By using as many nutrients as possible in the calculation, the Nutrivore score gives a more complete picture of the nutritive value of a food. The main nutrients used in the Nutrivore score calculation are protein, fiber, calcium, copper, iron, magnesium, manganese, potassium, phosphorus, selenium, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, B12, C, D, E, and K. Choline, monounsaturated fats, alpha-linolenic acid, linoleic acid, the long-chain omega-3 fats eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, and the phytonutrients carotenoids, polyphenols, and phytosterols. The Nutrivore score calculation also adds the highest value of available data for one bonus nutrient, relative to a threshold set using epidemiological studies similar to a percent daily value. The bonus nutrient can be any of the phytonutrients glucosinolates, thiosulfonates, and betalanes, vitamin-like compounds, coenzyme Q10, betaine, myoinositol, fatty acids, conjugated linoleic acid and medium-chain triglycerides, and amino acids and peptides, ergothioneine, and taurine. The reason why only one bonus nutrient is included in the Nutrivore score calculation is that these are all nutrients for which there is limited data. And too much incomplete data means that foods that are not as rigorously studied are unnecessarily penalized. The main dataset for the Nutrivore score calculation is the USDA Food Central database. Unfortunately, it's surprising how much nutrition information is missing from that database. So my team and I have worked to fill as many gaps as possible from other databases like Phenol Explorer and other national databases like Finelli, the nutrition database maintained by the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, and peer-reviewed scientific papers. So what are the results? What is the range of Nutrivore scores? And how do we use this simple yet fascinating number. There are foods with a Nutrivore score of 0, and the highest Nutrivore score is 14,744. There are lots of foods with really impressive Nutrivore scores. For example, beef liver has a Nutrivore score of 4,021. Watercress has a Nutrivore score of 6,929. And garlic has a Nutrivore score of 5,622. What I love about this calculation is that it redeems many foods that have a reputation for being unhealthy or pointless. For example, iceberg lettuce is not just crunchy water or the nutritional equivalent of cardboard. It actually has more nutrients per calorie than celery or artichoke or cucumber. And watermelon is not just sugar water. It's actually the second most nutrient dense of the common melons you can find in most grocery stores. The top is cantaloupe. That reminds me of a joke. Why should you never float a boat in a salad? Because it might hit an iceberg. I hope that mom joke earned your subscribe. Now, I know you're going to ask, what is a good Nutrivore score? Actually, all foods lie on a spectrum of nutrient density, so there's no cutoff above which a food has a good Nutrivore score and below which a food has a bad Nutrivore score. While we can simplistically say that any food with a Nutrivore score over 150 contributes more nutrients than calories to the overall diet, there are plenty of foods with lower Nutrivore scores that can fill important nutritional niches. A good example is cheese, which has an average Nutrivore score of 140, but is also the most concentrated food source of calcium. The best way to use the Nutrivore score is to identify the most nutrient-dense options within the foods you have access to, enjoy, and can afford. For example, instead of a dinner roll with a Nutrivore score of 130, consider a baked potato with a Nutrivore score of 266, or a baked sweet potato with a Nutrivore score of 497, or butternut squash with a Nutrivore score of 718. Making spaghetti? Instead of regular pasta with a Nutrivore score of 145, consider whole wheat pasta with a Nutrivore score of 202. Or options that are made with edamame, chickpeas, or lentils. Those Nutrivore scores go up to 509. Or you could do baked spaghetti squash with a Nutrivore score of 297. Noting, of course, that as I covered in my video on the Nutrivore philosophy, there are no bad foods or foods to avoid on Nutrivore. Anytime you can swap out a lower Nutrivore score food for a higher Nutrivore score food, you are upping your overall nutrient intake. And you can apply this to your choice of breakfast cereals, your choice of pizza toppings, snack foods, salad dressings, sandwich fixings, barbecue side dishes, everything you eat. Another great strategy to up the nutrient density of your meals is to think about foods that you can add to boost your nutrition, like vegetables, herbs, and spices. For example, let's say you add 1 tablespoon of garlic, that's 3 cloves, and half a cup of fresh basil to an entire jar of store-bought marinara sauce. That would boost the Nutrivore score from 575 to 707. Combine that with our more nutrient-dense noodle options, and you're increasing the nutrient intake even more. The term nutrient density refers to the concentration of nutrients per calorie of a food. High nutrient density foods supply a wide range of essential nutrients, or alternatively, high levels of 1 or 2 important nutrients relative to the calories they contain. And this is the entire premise of the Nutrivore score system, a way to quantify the nutrient density of foods and make the nutritional evaluation of foods objective, all to inform your day-to-day choices.